Julia Bradbury. I am so delighted to have you on the Therapy Works podcast.
Oh, Julia, thank you. I am so delighted to be on it. I'm very excited, a little bit nervous, and actually very thankful because I'm at a stage in my life where I'm really experimenting with my emotions and exploring them a little bit more. So it's come at the right time for me.
Oh, good. Well, that's exactly what we want to be doing. So, I think most people will have heard of you, but you're a well-known broadcaster, author, nature advocate, charity campaigner, and maybe even more significantly now, a mum of 3.
Yeah, certainly more significant for me. That I always say that my children are my best production.
Yes, that's a lovely way of saying it. So we start the podcast with a question, which is, tell me a challenge that you have faced or are facing.
Gosh, where do we start?
Yes, there's a lot. I've looked at your history.
Yes, I was asked recently by a doctor that I'm working with in America to look through my medical history. And when you start looking through your medical history, you might think, oh, I'm healthy. And then you start looking at things and you go, oh, that happened when I was 12 and that happened when I was in my 20s. And then I got endometriosis in my 30s. And then you suddenly realize there are all these health challenges along the way, and you're not that healthy picture that you think you are. So I think the obvious challenge that we should probably start with is 2.5 years ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And it really did come out of the blue for me. And I don't know why it was such a surprise, because then when I started to deep dive into my health and my lifestyle and my habits, it really wasn't for me such a surprise, because I was doing quite a lot of things right, but I was doing quite a lot of things wrong. And that's not to say that I blame myself for my cancer, or I blame anybody actually who is on the receiving end of a cancer diagnosis. But I think it is interesting when you do start to do a bit of an audit on yourself. There are things that you go, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. That makes sense. And I know that you've read my book, Walk Yourself Happy. And in the book, I talk to various experts, including people like Professor Russell Foster, who's a circadian rhythm expert, a sleep expert. And that was just one of the things that I knew I wasn't very good when it came to sleep. I knew that I hadn't really focused on my sleep very well throughout my life, that I'd pushed at my physical boundaries of sleep. I didn't, even though it's something I tell my children all the time, sleep is a superpower and it's important that you get your sleep. I didn't really, until I was sort of deep dive researching it, realize how important, what a fundamental pillar it is for all of us. Because if you don't sleep properly, your body starts to function in a different way. Your mind starts to function in a different way. You take more risks. You're more negatively inclined. You're more on edge. You're jumpy. Your blood sugar response isn't as good. It affects your blood, your hormones. Everything is affected by a bad night's sleep. And I've had many, many bad nights' sleep. Some of them great fun and all down to me. And some of them because work took precedent, or I was flying across time zones, or for whatever reason. So yeah, I would say that the breast cancer diagnosis is my biggest physical and emotional challenge to date.
And do I take from your response that when you're faced with a challenge, your first response is to investigate, like to kind of go in, see where does this come from? What can I influence? What do I have to accept? How do I make the best of this? So there's that. But I guess being given the diagnosis, can you bear to go back? Because there's that moment you have the news where it is the moment before. It's a seismic moment, isn't it? The moment before when you're kind of innocent to a greater extent. The illnesses you had before weren't life-threatening. And then after that, you're no longer innocent. And in some ways, you grieve for the innocence of the life that you naturally thought you're going to have, and you probably will have, but with less certainty.
Yeah, I was watching The Crown last night, and I'm up to the episode where Diana has her crash, and obviously The Crown is fiction, but there's a line in there where Prince Charles knows that Diana has passed away because of the car crash, and the Queen asks him, has he told the boys yet? And he said, no, the boys are still asleep, and I'm going to let them sleep for as long as possible, because while they still sleep, they still have a mother. And I suppose
that makes me cry.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the moment that you're talking about, the moment before you get the diagnosis. Actually, you don't have cancer. You're carrying on with your with your daily life. The moment I found out, actually, it was not clean cut, and I don't think cancer diagnoses are. I had discovered a lump about a year before.
Gosh.
And I'd had it investigated. I'd had a mammogram, and I had followed it up, and nothing untoward showed on the mammogram. And then I had a follow-up consultation with the doctor who would eventually become my surgeon. He also didn't find anything untoward, and he suspected that they were benign microcysts. That's how they were described. And then a year later, he did say to me, it would be worth you keeping an eye and monitoring this lump. Let's see where you're at in a year, and potentially it would be worth you having another mammogram in another year to see if it's changed. And it was just something at the bottom of my to-do list that I had. I will, yes, don't forget, in a year's time. And I'm not very organised when it comes to stuff like that, but it was there on the bottom of the list. A year later, the lump was still there, but this time it was painful. It was painful to touch. And as far as I could tell, it hadn't, I didn't know that it had got any bigger, but now there was this added dimension of pain. I went for my follow-up mammogram. This was to see what had happened and had it changed. And again, when I was in with the technical team, they said, no, there's nothing, we can't see anything. It looks fine. You do have dense breasts, which is relevant, but everything looks fine. So, don't worry. But I didn't have the consultation at that stage because my surgeon was away. He couldn't do the consultation. So I then went off on holiday and came back. And that was when I was going to have the consultation. About 4 or 5 weeks later, that's when he could see me.
But you kind of thought everything's fine. You took this. You thought this is good. This is a final kind of tick I'm going to get by seeing him.
Yeah. And I was going in to see him to have it confirmed that what the other team had said was absolutely true, that there was nothing to worry about here. And we were talking about holidays and stuff and traveling and mountains and walking. And he said, I'm just going to give you one more ultrasound before you go. I'm just going to give you another physical examination before you leave. I said, okay. And I hopped onto his table, and that was the moment. Within the next minute, that's when I knew, because I mean, this is a man who's been performing mastectomies and is a breast cancer expert. He's been doing this for 20 odd years. There was a slight falter in the way he moved.
In his face, you could
read it. And his face, and there was a little, it wasn't a sharp intake of breath at all. Actually, he stopped breathing for a second. And that was the moment I knew, because he said, I can see something there that I don't like. Can you see that? And I'm dreadful looking at those, even when I was pregnant and looking at the baby, I was like, really, is that a baby? I can't make that out, really. What are those wonderful butterfly visual tests?
Yes,
you guys use all the time.
Yeah,
I don't see those. I'm like, oh no.
Yeah. I can't remember what they're called. The school.
Yeah, you know what I mean. I'm not. Well, they'll come to us. It'll come to us. I can't see those. I'm not very good at those. They say, what can you see? I go, nothing. And so he said he could see a tiny pinprick of dart, and that was his clue that something was wrong. So I went back to imaging, and I had another ultrasound, and then there was like, yes, okay. So this was just 6 weeks after the same team had said, can't see anything. And it was very, 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 very small and difficult to detect. And that's when I discovered a couple of things. First of all, dense breasts. I've got dense breasts. A lot of women have dense breasts. It's very, very hard to see cancer on a dense breast mammogram, because the mammogram imaging is white and cancer is white. So if you have dense breasts, there is more white.
What does dense mean? That you've got a big boob?
Dense tissue. No, it's
how the tissue.
It's how the tissue is constructed, and it's tightly wound together, and you can see on the mammogram, you can see lots of bits of white, because that's the density of your breasts. That's the density of my breasts. Your breast might not be, but it makes it very difficult to see cancer, because the cancer is white as well. So as one doctor described it to me, it's a bit like looking for a snowflake in a snowstorm. So
It's really hard.
Very hard, and actually not. So that means mammograms for women with dense breasts, not that efficient.
And not very useful.
No.
But where you go straight away is your curiosity, isn't it? I can see that you didn't sit with the moment he said, I see something I don't like. You went to dense breasts. So that your kind of default mode of coping is to make sense of it. Why is it? And I wonder if even there's a sort of shudder of a memory of when you read his face. Do you feel that in your body, or have you kind of processed that now?
I think I've processed that. The bit for me that makes me shudder is immediately after the further imaging, which confirmed his suspicions, which was that there was something untoward there. I had to have a biopsy straight away. And biopsies are horrible procedures. I don't know if some of your listeners might have been through. Yeah, it's basically a hole punch to drill down, get the tissue. So you have a local anaesthetic. I don't like having anaesthetics at the best of times. It's more chemicals and stuff in your body. So you have a local anaesthetic. It really sort of damages your boob. You know, it bruises you. And then they drill down into the tissue and they pull out the rest. And it's, sorry for everybody listening, but it's not pleasant.
A bit brutal.
It's brutal, and it's probably, if you're going through something like that, I would say best to be forewarned about it, because it's not a nice procedure. So you have to prepare yourself. So I was doing my breathing exercises. It was at that point that I had a mask on because it was mid-COVID, and my sister was waiting for me downstairs. Gina was waiting for me, and I didn't know
took your sister.
saying, well, she took me actually, and she was waiting for me outside because we thought this was going to be a quick in and out. And she sent me a message, which I didn't know until afterwards, saying, "Are you okay? It's taking a long time." Then a tear started rolling down my cheeks, and I just, in my head, I went, "I want to see my children grow up."
Oh God!
And I still that still makes me cry every single time, because that was the moment where I sort of faced the real danger of cancer, as in this is going to be life-changing in a profound way, and that is my worst possible scenario, is not to see my children grow up.
Yeah, and it kind of reveals, in a kind of obliterating of other stuff way, what really matters most. That you live long enough to parent your children, to mother your children until they're, well, for as long as possible.
Yeah, for as long as, I mean, that is my mission in life now. It's to stay alive for as long as possible so that I can watch my children flourish and grow. And not just them. Obviously, I have a thirst for life as well. There's a selfish motivation there as well to stay alive. And I think, we've all evolved. We all have that. We want to live. But it has just created the most profound sense of gratitude for life on a daily basis, and for the small things. I say in my book, the small things are the big things. And for me, right now, not forever, because I want them to grow and leave and flourish. It's not that I want my children to stay small forever and be under my wing forever. But at this part of my life is so beautiful. It's so lovely. And it's such a privilege to be a mum. I came to motherhood late in life, and my girls were born through IVF. So another torturous procedure where you go through a range of emotions. So my children were hard fought for, and I love them with every essence of my being. And I just want to, and I want to be a good mum for them as well. I want to be a positive role model for them, and I want to be a healthy role model for them. I want to be a mum that they can look up to. I don't want to be a sick mum for them.
Because it sounds also that, a diagnosis is a change. So in that moment, everything changed. And some people resist change and they kind of block it, like, I'm going to be fine, I'm going to march forward, I'm going to be all right. And it sounds to me like you've let the change you, that you've really sat back, and I can hear it in the book too, really thought about, what do I need? How can I tip the balance in my favour? If 40% of all cancer diagnosis is preventable, and that's still 60% that is random, as it were, how can I amp my odds? And it sounds like you've taken that very seriously.
Yeah, and I think that's very much part of my character. Even with work projects, I love my job. I think it's such an edifying job, and I feel very lucky to be doing it. I've travelled the world. I've met some incredible people. It's been an education almost every day, and therefore I take it very seriously. So I work hard at my job in terms of doing my research, making sure I'm prepared, learning as much as I can. And when I'm there and I'm on location, I'm in the studio, I am as prepared as anybody could be. Yes, there will be curveballs and there'll be stuff that I can't deal with, but I feel that I've done my homework to get to that position in order to do that.
You jump in, don't you? You kind of go to the edge and you just take a bloody great dive. I mean, you take all the info and then you just go for it. Just to go back, I mean, I will want to ask you about change, But does that come from your upbringing? Tell me a bit about your early life, your parents' influences, how you came to be who you are now.
Well, that's always fascinating, isn't it? How did we all become who we are now? And as we know, it's this very complex mix of nurture and nature. And then there's good and there's bad. So on the surface of things, what I'd say to you is, Julia, I had the most perfect upbringing. I had two loving parents who were comfortable financially. Both of them worked. So I had two good role models, and they loved me and made sure that I knew that that love was there. And I had an older sister who I adored. And I grew up partially in a little village in Rutland, which was idyllic, next to a church. And I remember the church bells ringing, and I would climb apple trees and
it's like a Victorian book.
Yeah, it was honestly. So that's the surface of it. And I'm so grateful to my parents. Yes, for everything that they did. But of course, when you start to narrow down into complexities, my mum is a beautiful lady and a very complicated lady. She had a very, very tough upbringing. My grandparents were Greek immigrants. They moved to Wales about 100 years ago. My grandmother was born in Wales and my mother was born in Wales, but to a very Greek family living in one little house. And they were the Greek kids on the street. So there
could have been no other Greeks in rural Wales anywhere for thousands of miles.
Right? Well, it was Cardiff, so it wasn't that rural. And remember, it was a port; it was busy. So, but they were certainly, I think, the only Greeks on the street. And they would people would spit on them, and my mum would talk about all of those kinds of experiences. They had a lot of they had a lot of things to deal with, racial abuse. And, they were dark-skinned, Greekies, all the rest of it. And I had a bit of that when I was growing up. When I was at school, I was bullied. I was called the Greek. And
seriously?
And there were a group of girls who really, really didn't like me. And I was in, and then I was out, and then I was in, and I was out. So I dealt with that through my secondary school period. But Mum, because of her upbringing, she really, really was very driven, didn't want to go back to that place. So worked incredibly hard not to be short of money again. And she's very industrious, very entrepreneurial, so very inspiring from that point of view. Very sadly for her first marriage ended in disaster when her first husband committed suicide. So that was very, very dramatic as well.
Big trauma.
And big trauma. And my sister was born, Gina, who is technically my half sister, but I never call her my half sister because she's just been my sister from the time that I was born. So my sister Gina had that trauma as well. And there's no question that my mum and my mum and my sister had that trauma, lived with that trauma.
Yeah,
my sister's probably dealt with. Yes, and I don't think my mum, as a result, doesn't trust very many people, and she would never talk to a psychologist really like this because she's not trusting of them or the system or something. So she's carried a lot, and of course that would have permeated through my childhood. There would have been instances where I was very aware of all of this history, and sometimes I was a bit of a therapist for my mum.
So interesting, isn't it? Because if she'd lived under threat, which she did, threat of attack, threat of being different, alienated, and then her first husband died by suicide. Of course, the thing you absolutely lose is trust. Because when you're under threat, you don't trust anything. You don't trust your own safety, let alone that anybody else is trustworthy. So you live at that very heightened state. And so part of what made you who you were was to try and soothe her, I guess, to try and understand her, to be her therapist, which could go some way to answering why because I guess you're always observing her, trying to track her, work her out, why you're so curious, but also a really good communicator. Like you learned how to emotionally cadence your voice and tone and how you respond.
And I found my parents' relationship fascinating because my dad is very opposite to my mum in many, many ways. He's English born and bred. His parents were very detached and sent him to boarding school when he was a young boy. He's very loving and very caring as a father, but has this detachment. And he has his own trust issues for all of those reasons.
Yeah.
And he was
They found each other, didn't they?
They did find each other, but I don't know that they've always helped each other. I think sometimes when you're too similar in many ways, it becomes quite hard to help each other, to support each other. because there's a bit of
thin bridge.
So there was definitely tension between them, and the tension that I observed when I was growing up. And I don't mean tension in a horrible way. I don't mean it was a violent, abusive family home. I
just felt you could feel it.
Yeah. Yeah, and we can. Humans do. We pick up everything, don't we? Even if your mother is stressed or is open to an environmental toxin when she's pregnant with you, that will have an impact on you. We're now at this incredible stage in research where the fetus's brain is impacted by not just the food that our mother might eat, but cortisol, by the stress hormone. So my mum always says she was very, very happy when she was pregnant because it was in Ireland, and they both say that these were the happiest times of their life. But there will have been stresses and strains. They'd moved countries. My father became a stepfather very quickly to Gina. Life, that show me somebody who has had that Victorian idyllic upbringing where there are no complications and no stresses to deal with.
That's why this podcast is popular. People see themselves in it.
Yeah.
Because none of us, sort of cookie cut out perfect life doesn't exist for anyone. But so for you in your being, possibly is some transgenerational trauma. So you'd kind of looked at yourself like everything looks fine and it should feel fine, but somehow there's a part of me that is on alert, is somehow looking.
Yes, and that's what I've been exploring more recently. I just recently come back from a trip to South Africa, and I went to a beautiful place. It was a retreat, not a fancy retreat. It was a retreat that had beautiful gardens, and I'd heard amazing therapists of various kinds. One was a trauma release therapist who I wanted to see, a lady called Beth. And that was interesting. That was really interesting. There was another young woman there who gave the most incredible massages, but was also very, very intuitive. And she said to me, she said, I do tarot cards. Do you want me to read your tarot cards? Now, that's not my thing at all. I was like, but you know what? It's like, yeah.
Why not go for it? I'm here.
Everything.
Yeah.
At this, I'm here. I like you. Let's see where this goes, shall we? Yeah. So we did the tarot card thing, and she flipped the card, or I flipped the card over, and it was a snake. And she said, that's interesting. She said, because the snake, what do you think of snakes? I said, well, I don't like snakes personally. I really don't like snakes on a personal level. But she said, yeah, well, the snake is the sign of medicine. And if you think about it, I've written about it in the book. It's the international sign of medicine. And it is. And the Greeks used to use snakes as a sort of therapy. And the other meaning behind the snake as a symbol is it's a sign of shedding skin and moving on to new things, change. So anyway, that's that. I smiled. I didn't think, oh my gosh, this is going to change my life. I liked it. Yeah, I thought, okay, yes,
it resonated,
enjoying it. Yeah, and then she gave me the most incredible reflexology and massage where I almost cried. It was so powerful, and she could feel where I needed the work and the tension. So I left there on an absolute high. And also as part of this retreat, I saw a shaman, and he was a shaman called Bob with Celtic roots but in South Africa. And he, I know, quite extraordinary. And he'd spend a lot of time with tribes people all across Africa. And he's done his spiritual journeys and learnt his trade that way. And he had these, a bag of wooden plaques, so I could try some little discs, like domino discs, and they're wooden from a Shea woman. And what he did was he put his hand into the bag and then he threw them down. And he said, this is your medicine wheel. This is how it works, and it's guided by the spirits. I went, fine, yeah, let's do it. I was open. So he threw them down, and there were 4 north, south, east, west. And the one in the south, he went, oh, well, that's interesting. Sign of the snake. And I went, whoa. Yes. That is interesting, isn't it? And then I didn't tell him. Then we began to discuss the snake and his interpretation. And he said the snake can mean fear and overcoming fear and moving again onto new things and trying new things. And he said a very profound thing to me that has stuck with me. And that is that trying and doing are 2 very different things. And people get stuck on the trying. So he said, try and stand up. I said, are you telling me to stand up? He said, try and stand up. So, of course, I stood up. He said, that's what I mean. The difference between the trying and the doing. People get caught up on the trying to change their habits, the trying to do something better, the trying to do something new. And it's the doing that is the thing that pushes you forward.
So is it your mindset? Is that what you're saying? So if I say to myself, I've got to try and meditate for 10 minutes tomorrow morning, the trying is a barrier to me meditating for 10 minutes. If I just wake up, set my alarm and do it and meditate, that's the doing. No, I've misunderstood. Explain it to me.
No, I think it's that the trying is one step of a process. And by just saying you're going to try isn't the same as saying to yourself you're going to do. It's so I really actually meditate every evening now, and I do it probably wrong, and I do it to sometimes guided, sometimes not. But what it is for me is a really important part of my day to wind down, which I never gave myself before. And I really have to try. I have to pull myself away from what I'm reading. I have to pull myself away from what I'm doing. I might be
fun, really interesting. Yeah.
I could be listening to you and you're interviewing somebody and this is so interesting. But I just go, no, it's time to go to bed. This is my time. I really have to try. And I switch you off.
Doing it. Yeah.
And then I do it. I sit there and I actually lie down and I have a mat that I lie on. I put my legs up against the wall. And I do it. Whatever happens, I do it. And I really have to try very hard to do it, but I do it. And that, for me, I feel is the sense of accomplishment. Not even necessarily the meditating, the practice.
You're on the mat.
But I did it.
Yeah,
I'm on it. And I've got my legs up and I did it.
And does that, if we look at that lens of that moment where you're trying and you do, it's part of that kind of step by step. Since the diagnosis, the challenge of the diagnosis, your perception of what matters has changed. And I guess, how do you manage the fear? So you can go for the positive. I'm going to eat better. I'm going to sleep better. I'm going to exercise, and walking is your therapist as well. So we will talk about that. I imagine you get suddenly hits of fear or images, or how do you not?
So this is how I have learned to manage the fear. I decided to open my mind and my heart and my body up to emotional experiences and to exploring myself and to learning more about myself emotionally than I ever have done before. Because my feeling is if I can surrender to good emotions and bad emotions, I'm being true to myself. And if I'm being true to myself, I will be able to handle the wobbles. Whereas if I put on this brave face, which I'm very capable of doing, of toxic positivity, and I believe very much in positivity. My mum, interestingly, gave me 12 cassette tapes of positive thinking when I was about 11 or 12, and I listened to them and I loved them. And I still go by positive mantras and affirmations.
Yeah, no, they do help.
That I think they help you through everyday life, and I think that it changes your outlook. But I think you can almost try and fool yourself that that's it. And if you listen to the tapes and you say the affirmations, then life's going to be great. And of course, that isn't what makes life great. That isn't how you can get through life. The only way you can get through life is by facing the challenges and dealing with them and handling them on every level. And I just feel that what the breast cancer diagnosis has done for me is opened me up. It's made me vulnerable, but in a good way, because I'm not frightened to show that vulnerability anymore. I can express that vulnerability because I have a right to be vulnerable and to be scared, because I faced something quite terrifying. And therefore, it's given me, I think, an excuse to dive more into who I am and what I am and why I am. And I feel almost as if it's given me another purpose in my life now, which is to learn as much as I can and share what I learn. And by being this open book, I know that I can help other people, because I get emails and letters every day from people saying, thank you for some of your posts, thank you for the book, thank you for what you say, thank you for your approach. I get lots of emails from people telling me, you tell me what to eat, you tell me how to exercise, and my auntie was very healthy and she still got cancer, and all of the, you get pushback as well. Of course you do. Again, that's life and what you have to deal with. So I find myself in a very, very interesting time. And that's why I was so happy and grateful that you asked to do this podcast with me, because it's an opportunity to talk to a world-renowned expert and open up and learn something more about me.
Oh, that feels very touching. But what you're saying feels deeply profound and meaningful. And it's like changing the template of what you saw modeled by your mum. And kind of recognizing is when you face and allow yourself to go both ends of the spectrum, if you have pain and fear one end and joy and love this end, when you close one, you close the other. And so you're expanding your whole being and heart and engagement, which is both vulnerable and exposing, but also, I imagine, profoundly kind of, well, meaningful. I was going to say exhilarating almost. It's like life has more depth to it now, because you really kind of are going for it. So using all that you had before, but kind of uncovering your protection.
Yes, and I think you've really expressed it very clearly for me. Life has more colour, it has more texture, it has more meaning to it. I'm trying to be a kinder person, a more graceful person, a more understanding person as I expand my growing and my learning. And it's one of my new affirmations is I'm expanding my learning, I'm expanding my learning, I'm expanding my grace every day. That's one of sort of a section of my mantras every day, is to really put myself out there. And that's my new coping mechanism. Whereas I think before, my coping mechanism was just to get on. I do have people comment about this energy. I have lots of energy. I can feel
it.
I just want it to be harnessed in the right way. And I feel that it's almost as if sort of a light bulb has gone off. And it's like, oh, okay. And I'm not, again, I think how I behaved in the first half of my life got me to where I am, and it pushed me into different places. And I was pushy, and I pushed on lots of doors, and I annoyed lots of people. And, I really sort of hustled to get to this place. Sometimes now I look back and I'm embarrassed by what I did or said, like, oh God, it's quite cringy how I managed to do that or what I said. But I can't regret it. So now I feel now that there's sort of this combination of, I've got that experience, but now I have sort of a new layer of experience, and how can I expand myself and my world in a different way now?
It sounds like how sort of more rooted in your heart way. Before, the push was like going fast and going furious, to achieve. And now it feels like you're going slower because you really want to cherish every moment. So the decisions that you make and what you do with your time, you really want it to match who you are now in a way. And so that, you can't just waste time and just do something that isn't meaningful or doesn't kind of meet some of that. So what are the kinds of things, for people listening who have maybe had a mastectomy like you have? I can hear how it's changed you. And you part of what you're doing in the future is wanting to do more good, isn't it? To influence, so that it's meaningful what you do. So how might you be doing that?
Well, I'm looking at myself, Julia Bradbury, the TV presenter, the author, the public face, and I'm going, right, what do I want to be now? What do I want to represent?
Yeah. What do I want to use my platform for?
Yes. And I've got a very, very good friend. I've got great friends in South Africa. That's why I was there. Friends who I've known since I was in my 20s, who I cherish. And particularly one of my friends, Hetty, and I had this conversation. And she said, Jules, I've seen you over the years. I've seen what you do. And she's in television as well. She's a very talented writer and producer. And she said, you've got this extraordinary opportunity now where you've gone from what you've done over here, which is really admirable, and now you've written this book, which has become a bestseller and has put you into this sort of health and wellness space. And now you're sitting here. What are you going to do? She said, I want to know, what are you going to do? And I said, you know what, Hetty? I said, that's what I'm thinking about. That's what I'm exploring, because I know that I want it to be profound, and I want it to be useful, and I want it to be big, and I want it to be gentle and good. But I need a little bit of guidance now. I just don't quite know how to make this next step and where it should be exactly. So I'm doing something that I haven't done before, Julia. I'm taking a bit of time.
Good for you.
Yeah, and I'm really... My book deal with my lovely publishers is a 2-book deal. And I had an idea for what book 2 might be, but they're already starting to, they're sort of saying now, okay, book two. And at the moment, I'm just going, no, hold on. book one is still out there.
Yeah, it's a hardback. It needs to go into paperback. Yeah.
And it's a bestseller, so you guys are happy. So, we've done that bit. I really want to take time now to work out what is the next step going to be, because it's got to be the right step, and it's got to be right for everybody, including me.
Well, primarily you, I would thought. That there's a I don't know if you've heard of this concept. It's called the fertile void. It's from Gestalt, Fritz Perls' model of therapy. You have a kind of an awareness you want something, you go for it, you decide what you want, you get what you want, you make contact, you take in the result of what you've done, and then before you do something else, there's this gap where you have a fertile void, where you allow the liminal space of fertility, of thinking about something, not doing it, thinking about something else, not doing it, exploring, trying out, wondering. And it's a place of great fertility, but it isn't a place of action until you come to a point when you go, okay, now I know what my next step is.
That makes perfect sense, and thank you for sharing that, because there's a validity to what I'm doing, and I suppose that's part of me. That's important for me to know. I don't feel like I'm time wasting. I don't feel like I'm being lazy. I just feel that I really need to experiment, push on some doors, and learn as much as possible as to what's next.
But also, having had your diagnosis, had a very serious operation, recovery from the operation, written a book, very successful book, promoting the book, which it takes almost as much work as the book, certainly takes a huge amount of energy. You actually, if you think of yourself like a season, you've had your spring and summer and autumn, and now you need your winter. You need your winter to let the leaves settle, the ground, go underground, and just have a winter, have Julia's winter, so that you can properly restore before you start growing again.
And you've said I can do that, so that's great.
But is permission giving to yourself hard to do? I mean, I imagine there's your mum's drum in you, like, she's an entrepreneur, get going, keep pushing. Is part of your learning going to be really giving yourself permission to be rather than do? Is that part of the...
It is part of it, but it's a difficult part of it, because I've got 3 young children, the pressures of everyday life.
Yeah, you need to bring home the big
bills. The bills keep coming in. So there's this balance of, and I understand I'm in an incredibly privileged position in as much as I have a bit of leeway. I have got time to have a little bit of space, and I'm very, very grateful for that. And I know that people don't have that often, and that that's another enormous pressure. But it is definitely a consideration. I have learned over the past couple of years, and I would say this to other ladies who are in my position. Remember, once you've had a cancer diagnosis, you have, from a work point of view, you have allowances. You have to be listened to at work, and you have to be given the time that you need, and the goalposts changed at work. You have the ability to make more demands of work, to say, I need this time, I need some medical time off, whatever it might be. Look into that. Look into your rights at work, because you do have more rights post a cancer diagnosis. And I do things now. So for me, it has to be an exceptional circumstance where I don't do my morning routine. So my morning routine is to wake up, to smile, get the
hello
chemicals going.
Yeah.
Yeah, hello day. So even if I don't feel like her, smile. And then I go straight to my bathroom, and I open my bathroom window, and I climb out onto my bathroom ledge, which is safe because it's got a little balcony thing.
Okay, I'm not going to have a heart attack at the idea of it. Good.
No. And I have a little blanket that I put out first onto the windowsill, and I have one of those big dry robe coats that I pop on, and I get my morning light. And I look out, whether it's a grey day or whether it's a beautiful sunny day. I get my morning light, and you will know, getting the morning light into your eyes hits the receptor, back of the brain, delivers a whole host of messages.
Cascade.
To get you ready for the day ahead. So it changes your body chemistry, which is phenomenal. Just that light.
Extraordinary.
Yeah. So I do that. And at the same time, I'm doing my breath work. And honestly, whether it's for 10 minutes, which is the minimum, or whether it's for half an hour, which is my optimum, after that little routine, I feel amazing. That is me ready for the day ahead. It really sets me up. It is sort of an elixir. So I make sure, and whatever's coming in, whatever work stuff is coming in, it's an early radio thing, it's come onto GMB, it's write something for the book, I make sure I either get up earlier so that I can do that, or I push whatever it is back and go, I can't do it till such and such a time. There are a few exceptions where sometimes nothing can be changed, in which case I'll do it afterwards, whatever. But that for me has been an absolute game changer. And I've been lucky that the production companies that I've worked with so far have been very mindful of what I've been when they say, well, can you do a 7 a.m. start? I go, no, I'm really sorry, I can't. I'll be doing this then. And I need to get myself, I'll be much more used to you if you have me there at 10, because I'll be ready to go. I will be mentally sharp. I will be physically energized. It's going to be better for all of us if we can do that, please.
So it's great to also to have a no, to be able to say, rather than sort of think, oh God, I have to do it, to have a clear no about what is your priority that protects your physical and mental health, but also is a role model of people you're working with, right? It's not any better for them either. So in the back of my mind, and this may be too personal, I wonder how your 3 children are with your diagnosis. Do they worry? How much do they know? And this you may not want to talk about it.
I'm happy to talk about it, because I have spoken about how telling my children was the most difficult thing that I've done in my life. But I wanted to tell them because I felt it was important. I think it's, yes, as a parent, you want to protect your children. Of course you do. But you also, I think, have a responsibility to help them learn and grow. And that means sometimes exposing them to truths that are not always comfortable. I didn't hear the words during my diagnosis. And again, I'm very grateful for this. This is going to be very aggressive and it's going to be very difficult to treat. And there's a 40% chance you're going to die. I didn't hear that. A friend of mine has heard that. I didn't hear that. So I honestly didn't feel, once I was through the onslaught of those initial diagnoses and appointments, I didn't feel I was going to die imminently. There might be feelings now in the back of my head about the reoccurrence, which is why I do everything that I do to try and reduce those risks. But I didn't feel that I had to say to my children, Mummy's got cancer and there's a good chance I'm going to die. What I had to do, which is even more complicated, say, Mummy has this thing called cancer and she's not going to be very well for a period of time, but she's probably going to be okay. Now, for a child, that's not really great, because you really want to tell children definitive things. You're going to do this, this is how it's going to be. And of course, I couldn't in this instance. This was much more vague. So my partner and I decided to tell them in the garden, because that's a place where we spend a lot of time.
And you would, your belief in nature, it's your kind of spiritual home, isn't it, really?
Yeah, very much so. So we took them for a walk around the garden, and at the time my twin girls were 7 and my son was 11. And we just said, look, we've got something to tell you, and that is that Mummy's not very well and she's got something called cancer. Immediately, I think one of them said, is your hair going to fall out? Because that's what children think about cancer. And I said, no, I don't think my hair's going to fall out, darling, because I don't think I'm going to have that sort of treatment for my cancer. What I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have an operation, and it's going to be to my left breast, my boob, as we call them, and I'll be very sore for a while, and I don't really know what else is going to happen after that. So I'm just you're going to have to be with us, and we'll get through all of this together. And my little girl said, Mummy, does that mean I won't be able to hug you anymore? And I said, no, of course not. That means that you need to hug me more. I will want more hugs, please, but I might be a little bit sore for a while. And so that's how we explained it to them. And I think they are okay. And we talk about my boob, because I had an immediate reconstruction. Yeah, and my girls, they have a little feel every now and again. And I feel the squidgy boob and the not so squidgy boob, because my false boob is a silicone boob, so it feels different to the. So we do that. And last year, one of my little girls, who's the deep one, said to me, Mummy, what happens if your cancer comes back? And I said, I don't know the answer to that, Zena, but it isn't good. When cancer comes back, it generally isn't a good sign, because it means it's still somewhere in you and it when it comes back like that, it can be more aggressive. And she said, and do you think yours is going to come back? I said, I don't think it is. I can't promise you.
So you're so honest, which you need to be.
And she just looked at me with big brown eyes and she sort of shook her head. Honestly, of course it's affected them. Of course it's impacted them. But we do talk about it regularly. We do check in. And what I'm now trying to do is they see me trying very hard with my food. I'm very, very enthusiastic about their health and their food as well now. They know that. Sometimes they hate it, but no sugar. They see me exercising. And they see how hard it is sometimes to exercise. I exercise when I don't feel like it. I make sure that they're outside every day. They see that I'm trying my very best. And I think it's the best I can do, is for them to see that I'm really, really trying to keep myself healthy for me and for them. Should anything happen, it's not for want of trying. It's not for me trying to do my very, very best. And I just think in the back of my mind, I think they'll always have that. Mummy tried her best.
And also, the other important thing is that you're living every day. Yeah. Like, it feels to me like you are really living your life. The life that you have now, you're living it with all of your being. Like, you have in some way engaged and jumped in it deeper. And so that you love more, feel more alive, more grateful. It's intensified the quality of your life, and that they will pick up from you. That will be contagious in a good way.
Yeah. My little girls held hands this morning. They argue quite a lot, so I don't want to seem like Swiss Family Robinson, but they held hands, and it just made my heart jump. One of my little girls went, I'm creating oxytocin.
They really know. It doesn't. It's true.
Yeah, so you can really see, because when I hug them, I have a stress monitor now on my
HRV.
wrist.
Yeah,
for HRV and for stress and things. And both of my girls are fascinated. Every time I go at night to hug them good night, they click on my stress monitor and they go, "Let me see what your stress is, Mummy." And they hug me, because I say to them, "Well, when you hug me, my stress levels go down because my oxytocin is going."
Yeah.
So they hug me and they watch it. They go, "It's going from 60. Oh, it's down to 30. Oh, it's down to 12." And that's amazing. But they see it. And that also, for me, I think, gosh, this will help them as they're older. They will really see that these things help. The hugging, the precious, the meditation.
Yeah.
It's a really important lesson for them.
Isn't it the best way of using gadgets? Because gadgets can be so awful, but when it really creates the evidence that you need, that hugging is the best medicine in the world, that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, and who would have thought that a bit of tech could do that? Who would think that, a wearable, as they call them, would create that connection with your children and teach them in such a meaningful way about something so separate from your physical health, really. It's not separate. We all know it's part of it, but it's a different way of looking at health.
So we're coming to the end. Is there a final learning that you want to explore or think about?
I suppose I'd like to ask you, as I'm fortunate enough to have your expert knowledge here. I suppose I'd like to ask you, how do you think I can best continue grow? Because I don't know this, but do you hit a ceiling? Do you hit the moment where you can't grow and expand anymore, or do you hit a wall? Or how is it that you can continue to push those boundaries? How can I continue?
What comes to mind is that there are two sides of it, which is probably the key quality is self-compassion, like being kind to yourself within it, so that you do want to grow. The growing mustn't become a police state that you sort of then become the kind of ordered and marched to do everything that's positive, so that you have amazing instincts. So I think you will go on growing when you follow your instincts, because that's in you. And really where that leads you is where you love, right? Where you feel most powerfully. And some of that could be a project where you have an idea for a project and you really feel the love for that. And otherwise it's with people. That's how you really grow. isn't it? Because you feel there's more in you, and then when there's more in you, that gives you the capacity to manage the winds when they come and hit you.
Yeah, social fitness, that as you said, the people around you is very, very important. And finding mentors and people that you can openly discuss topics with. I'm finding more and more people like that in my life, and I really value that.
Yeah. Well, you can always call on me. I'd be more than happy to be.
Thank you.
Someone to have use as a sounding board.
I would like to do that. Yeah, definitely.
But Julia, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for being so open and so vulnerable and so honest. It's so valuable for everyone who listens. And you are using your experience to help other people, and that's a real gift to others and you.
Thank you. Well, I hope that if there's anybody going through something similar, honestly, the way I got to this point, and I'm by no means the complete picture, but it really is just handling the information one step at a time, one day at a time. It can be very, very overwhelming, and you will have days of absolute sadness that seeps into your core. But I think we all need to have those moments.
You do? Because they release you to have other feelings. Yeah.
Yeah. You need to let the light in alongside the dark. So
yeah.
I hope this is useful to lots of people.
I'm sure it will be. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Julia. Thank you. So lovely to meet you.
And you. All right, Sophie and Emily. I was wondering what your response was to listening to the Julia Bradbury podcast. What your kind of initial thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, she's such a joy to listen to, isn't she?
Yeah.
There's something about the energy in her voice. And like you can feel her passion and sort of curiosity. Yeah. I did have a slight panic around her statistics at the beginning of no sleep. As someone who doesn't get very much sleep, I was like, oh no, am I like damaging myself by not getting enough sleep? But it also made
question. I think you have to think about that.
Well, no, because I mean, I suppose that's what it made me think about, because I suppose it's sort of there's a limit to the amount we can control, but also on the flip side, there's also our own internal motivation, right? And I know what I should do to help sleep, and I don't do all of the things. For example, the really obvious, terrible one is phone. I know I should keep my phone downstairs or outside or something, but I don't. And then when I wake up at 2 a.m., I look at my phone and I know I shouldn't do it. And I suppose sort of what it made me think about relating to the conversation with Julia was around, she had a massive, when you face your own mortality.
Wake up call.
It's a massive kick up the arse, right? To do the things that that, or at least it was for her, and I think for lots of other people too in a similar situation, to do the things that help. So it tipped the scales from like, I know I shouldn't be staring at Instagram in the middle of the night, but it's kind of all right there, and it's like, hitting all the neural pathways to know actually this really, really isn't worth it. And I guess there's that sort of scales, isn't there, between what we know we should do and the motivation driving us to actually do it.
That is interesting, isn't it? Because it's sort of below the waterline, and all of us, like this time of year, there's all this talk about resolutions or rituals, or it's not like everybody doesn't know to eat 5 vegetables a day and exercise and get outside. We don't make ourselves, and we sit and watch telly and eat chocolate. And it's something like a life-threatening diagnosis forces you to face the impact of your behaviors. But what I was wondering was, people listening and you having listened, will it turn the dial up on you paying attention, or do we have to have them ourselves?
I think it really depends. I also think that in our lives, like in the modern world, there are things that are sort of stacked against your little flicker of motivational flame that gets sort of blown out by like, the addictive quality of lots of processed foods and things like that. So you can have really good intentions, but unless they're really big, it is,
difficult.
I think
it's really difficult.
Hard. So I am going to be honest and say probably I was still going to look at my phone in the middle of the night, even though I know I shouldn't and I mean not to.
Yeah.
But it's funny because I think of both of you as quite, particularly you, Mum, but you as well, with some things, quite good at, healthy habits and self-discipline at times. Whereas I would say I was someone who finds that much harder than you.
But I'm good because I'm addictive. So because I'm so addictive, I make the habit my addiction. So I use the same mindset that is very kind of going for something to try and keep me on the straight and narrow.
But I think you're also very good at, I think what we know about habits is that the easier, the less effort you can make them for yourself, the more likely it is that you're going to do them. So say your resolution is, I am going to drink a glass of water every morning. Then you put the glass of water out the night before, so it's right there. Things like that. I think you're very good at sort of reducing the barrier to entry of doing something healthy. And it sounds like sort of similarly to Julia, that she sort of makes it such an inbuilt part of her routine that it's not really an option.
But for people listening that are more in your mindset, that find it hard, do you know what it is that makes it difficult to make the tweaks, as it were?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you both for feedback. So I was saying, I know that for me, when I could get into an internal resistance battle with something that, as soon as I hear something is I'm not quite this controlling, but basically as soon as I hear something is good for me, then it feels like I should do it, which then feels like I'm being told to do it, which then means I don't want to do it. It feels like it becomes a chore.
Rebellious
or it becomes,
teenager.
Somehow brings out like an inner resistance that's like, I don't want to have to do that every day. It feels like something I have to do rather than something I move towards.
Yes. But on the flip side, I think maybe it's like one of those things where the things that you find difficult are also your strength. Because I think Mum and I are not flexible. I think you're much more sort of open to what your body is telling you. Yeah, like what the mood. Whereas I'm like, whatever I feel, I'm going to make me... and sometimes it's good not to do that too, to have some flexibility, to have some sort of self-compassion. There's like an openness to not being rigidly habitual.
I wonder if there is any research out there looking at the relationship between habit and addictiveness in healthy behaviours. Because I would say I'm a very non-addictive personality, unlike you, Mum. I find it very, very hard to do habits. I don't have, as far as I know, any habit that I do regularly.
Oh, you do?
Because I have.
I'm protesting at that.
Okay, do tell me. What do I do?
Okay, so
I tend to have a cup of tea after lunch.
That's what I was going to say. You don't drink caffeine during the day, but you allow yourself one cup of tea after lunch to get you through the afternoon.
I do, and I have it with some dark chocolate. And I actually, funnily enough, say that I read somewhere, and I can't remember where, one of the properties of caffeine is to make behaviors more addictive, so that whenever you drink caffeine with a habit, that habit is more deeply ingrained and kind of accentuates. So maybe
now
I
you
do
need
that
the dark
because
chocolate with your
I do. I always, if I drink a normal, if I don't want to have the biscuit or the chocolate, I have to drink non-English breakfast tea, so it doesn't it's not the same thing. If I'm having English breakfast tea, I have to have some, a biscuit or a chocolate or something like that.
Yeah,
So
but is that also because it's like your treat, your very low-level treat?
Yeah, so this is getting a bit boring for everyone listening.
Should we go to Julia now?
So my other thinking was really around how honest she was with her children and how much courage it takes to be really honest with our children. And I think we've talked about this before, our kind of instinct to protect by not telling them the hard truth, but actually it doesn't protect them. And what I really loved was how, I think she said, one of her daughters had a question and around like the recurrence of her cancer and how she was able to say, I don't know. And I think that's something as parents we actually find very difficult to say to our children, but it's so important to be able to say, whatever the question is, to be able to say, I don't know. And you can also acknowledge how hard it is for them not to have an answer, that you as their mum or their dad or their caregiver, the people who are sort of supposed to know everything, you don't know everything. And then I think you can also add, I can ask so-and-so, and when I find out, I can tell you, or I will let you know as soon as I know.
Yeah, that's
so.
good.
For example, in situations that are really unknown, like your parents are separating, and often when parents are separating, it takes a while for the sort of cards to fall, and you don't necessarily know who's going to be living where and how it's going to work. And so to be able to say, like, this is what I do know, and if they have questions, I don't know, but as soon as we know, like where daddy's going to live, where mommy's going to live, we can let you know.
Yeah, because that builds trust, doesn't it? They trust you.
Exactly.
Yes, I was going to say that somehow it's an act of trust, isn't it, to have those. It's quite safe making to be trusted and to dialogue, isn't it? In terms of part of what's scary having those conversations is feeling that you're going to scare your children, whereas actually for them to have a very straightforward, honest conversation actually is it's a soothing experience, and to know that that you can also say it in that, and you can keep asking me questions. This is something that we can keep talking about. Like, this isn't like your one window.
One off and done.
If you suddenly have a question later that pops into your head, you can always ask me.
The other thing I was really interested in was, and the research that supports it, is being grateful for life, how that enhances your quality of life and actually your outcome.
I always find it a tough one because I agree and I know it's true. And at the same time, being constantly told to be grateful
It's really
feels
annoying.
quite grating. Like, And so it's sort of one of those ones that's like, like I know it's good and it does actually help me feel better when I do it.
But only if it's genuine.
There's some. But actually I think the research is, even if it's not genuine, like even if you could just find something and it doesn't feel authentic immediately, it actually still has a positive effect. There's something about it, and I think it's like the Pollyanna-ish feeling of it, that there's part of me that feels like if I have to be grateful all the time, I'm missing out the things that I find annoying, or somehow those things aren't valid, which is obviously not true. But I think that's the sort of resistance, that it feels like I'm supposed to be really grateful. That means I'm not allowed to be ungrateful.
But it's also like that, she touched on the word phrase toxic positivity. And that was one of the things I was, thought about when she was saying it. But it's because I'd recently had a conversation with a friend where she was sort of saying, we were talking about New Year's resolutions. She's like, but if my New Year resolution is to try and be more appreciative of what I have, how does that balance out with all the times when I don't feel like that? Should I be sort of trying to turn my head towards the positive things, or should I be feeling the low things? Somehow with the gratitude thing, you can feel like it's saying that I'm not allowed to feel the other things. But actually, it's much easier to feel grateful if you also allow yourself to feel
be really pissed off,
mad and pissed and ungrateful. And then there's sort of more space to then feel grateful again.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's like when you're talking to somebody, there can be nothing more annoying when you're complaining about something or having difficulty, and they can go, but you've all got your health, or but at least this, like try and what I guess in those moments help make you feel better by reminding you of the good things in your life, and all you feel is like unacknowledged, unheard, and like they've also said that you should be grateful rather than you should be upset. Whereas actually, if someone can go, yes, that's really shit, that's blah, 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 then at the end you can say, but actually I do know that actually everything's okay.
I was shouting at the bit where she was talking about the images and what you see, and you're like, look, Rorschach, right?
Yeah, the visual.
I looked it up and I still couldn't find it.
The blottings.
Yeah.
Yes, but it's like one of those ones. It's like thing you see Rorschach.
Yeah. How do you spell it?
I don't know actually how you spell it.
I find the image.
I just know
I've got the image.
I think it's RORSA.
Do you want to describe
like a
that
funny
for
one.
people?
Well, I can describe it, but I will say that I have never used it. I don't really know. It's one of those ones that you sort of see in films, and you see, particularly films about serial killers, but like where they like, see scary things in an image. So I'm not really the one. I know what it is, but I don't really know what it is also. I know it's like an image, and the person describes what they see, and then there's like a psychiatric interpretation from what they see. But that, I feel like I don't know any more than probably anybody else.
Yes, likewise.
I think it was quite an early. I'm not sure that people use it. Do they?
No, I never use it.
I think if they do, it's rare. I don't know anyone who uses it.
It's quite fun.
People out there in our listeners who do.
Yeah, please contradict us.
Yeah. I mean, I can see how it could be quite a creative process, couldn't it? I mean, as a conversation starter of like, what do you see and what does that mean to you? And, it's like dreams or something else that's sort of symbolic, but we don't really know the meaning of. It'd be quite rich territory.
Right. I guess there's a difference between using it as a place to be curious about your internal world versus using it as a diagnostic tool.
For sure.
Not like you are a psychopath because you saw X in this image.
Yes. There was only one more thing I was going to add. At the end, you were talking about sort of the importance, when she asked you the question to you, Mum, and you were talking about social relationships and the importance of relationships. And I thought it was worth adding from a sort of eco-psychotherapy point of view, given that it's Julia Bradbury who has talked a lot about relationship nature. It's actually, it doesn't also always have to be human beings.
Oh, yeah.
That we have relationships with that are very meaningful. It can be with a tree. It can be obviously with people's pets. If I think there's the man called David Abrams, he's an eco-psychotherapist and a writer, and he talks about the importance of how valuable and rich and deep these kind of relationships can be, and how they actually place you by having those relationships. For example, some people have like sit spots. They have a tree that they always go to, and they always sit there, and they do it daily, or they do it weekly, or they do it regularly, and then that place becomes a real place of comfort and meaning, and that we don't always need other
human beings as a source of connection and comfort. To feel connected to the rest of the natural world can also be very meaningful or soothing and connecting in not such a different way as I think maybe sometimes we.
That's lovely. I hadn't thought of that. I didn't even kind of know it. I think that's a lovely addition. Thank you, Emily and Sophie, and particular thank you to Julia Bradbury. Thank you so much for such an insightful and interesting conversation. For those of you who think others might benefit from it, do rate and subscribe and share the podcast with those around you. Thank you all for listening, and we will be in your ears next week.